evening, everybody, and welcome back to Wilbur Talks FPL, where we talk everything FPL and, of course, the Premier League in general. We are back with not a lot to look back on compared to what we generally have, so the pod format will be slightly different, but we'll get through it, I'm sure, and there's a lot of interesting, especially transfer and wildcard potentially talk to come in the second half, and I'm sure a lot of people are considering pressing that wildcard button from what I've seen. But before we jump into it, I better introduce, I guess, for today, Charlie is back as usual. How are you, Charlie?
Yeah, well, good, thank you. Glad to be back and Premier League football back on again.
That'll be fantastic to actually see some football, apart from Europa, as I've seen. And unfortunately, with Champions League rotation, well, you could say fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what side of the coin you're on. There you go.
Fortunately.
Fortunately, according to Pete, we've got Pete back today because he fits perfectly with the Liverpool-Chelsea rotation in Champions League. So how are you, Pete?
I am good. It's good to be back.
Welcome back. Appreciate jumping on with the rotation with Sam. I didn't realise how well that rotation worked until I thought about it earlier in the week. So that could come in handy for especially the group stage, but we shall see how it gets on. But yeah, so like I said, guys, we're going to kind of talk on a few things, like questions that have come up over the last few weeks, not go into great detail, obviously, because we've got no fixtures to look back on. Identify kind of what the three of us are kind of planning towards going into the next game week, and then the second half of the pod, we're probably going to look at some kind of wildcard drafts, maybe even some people might be tempted to buy a free here, but we'll discuss those kind of things as we go through the pod. So I want to start a question for you, Charlie. What do you think of all the postponements and how it's being dealt with in general? Have you got any general thoughts? Do you think they've managed it well, or just been a bit of a mess in some circumstances?
I think I agree with the general line that most people seem to come out with, which I don't think it was really necessary to postpone all the games. It felt like it made it a bigger thing by postponing them all, rather than there seemed to be some worries about from the Premier League and so on about what might kind of come out or from the fans if they were allowed to watch the games, and maybe some demonstrations or whatever. But I think that's not really fair on the fans, and I think we saw in other sports as well going ahead, like rugby, for example, where they did have games going ahead and there's a chance to sing the national anthem before and things like that, which actually I think would have been much better than what they did. So overall, I don't really think they should have done it, but we are where we are, I guess. And I'm glad. I think there's probably more games on this weekend than we maybe would have thought there might have been. So at least from that perspective, it's a bit better.
Yeah, from what I heard, I think the FA kind of panicked a bit because I think they had this kind of plan in place for whenever this event would take place, and I think within that plan was that all sporting events for the weekend would be called off. But then, kind of more recently, they've changed that to the FA or whatever board it is to make their own decision. So I think that caught the FA a bit off guard because they thought everything was going to be called off by the government, but then it wasn't. So I don't think they really knew what to do. So I think they got themselves in a bit of a muddle there. But yeah, like you said, other sports could play on, so it seemed a bit strange, and I think it's going to cause a few more issues later down the line in terms of getting these fixtures replayed, and with consolidated schedule already, I think it might cause some maybe like FA Cup replays or just putting in matches wherever they can really to back up these fixtures. It might be a bit of a mess. What are your thoughts on it, Pete? Any different to what we've said already?
Well, just from a personal point of view, being a Chelsea fan, I was quite glad to see our game called off because it gives new manager extra few days to get some stuff sorted out in training. Otherwise, I think it would have been like one day and then straight into a Prem match away to Fulham in a West London derby, which wouldn't have been ideal. So from that point of view, I was obviously quite glad to see it off. But from a general point of view, I think it would have been much better off having, the minute silent and the minute silence and the national anthem at every game. I feel like that would have been a lot better way to deal with it, and it would have been something that everyone would have gotten behind, apart from maybe Liverpool fans.
Let's get that one in. Yeah, I think it does sort of have the minute silence, in my opinion. I was actually at the Man United Europa League game on the Thursday night, which was the day it was announced, which was about 6:30, and the game kicked off at 8. so it was too late to postpone the game, which might have happened in any case. But I was surprised how well respected the minute silence was. I think with such short notice, like an hour and a half before, that I think a lot of people were just in shock and didn't really know how to react, so didn't have a lot of time to process it, I think. But I think it would have been well respected just given the circumstances, but now it just gives a bit of a headache later down the line. I think it's a bit odd that like United are going to be playing both of their Europa League games, but then not playing League for 2 weeks. It seems a bit strange to me. And I saw that Arsenal's game was called off as well, isn't it, for the Europa League as well, Charlie, which could cause you some issues later down the line. I've heard about potentially having to reschedule one of your Premier League games or even forfeit the match because you have to play before the World Cup.
Yeah.
So it's just causing a lot of issues, isn't it? That maybe could have been thought about before making such rash decisions. But we'll move and we'll see how it should make the rest of the FPL season exciting, because we're just expecting a normal season for a change. Obviously, the World Cup in the middle, but you could get to a point where you get like double game week for every single team if they put that whole round of fixtures back in somewhere. But we will see how that falls. So I wanted to ask you, Pete, about your own team. Obviously, since the last time you was on, you've had a managerial change. I don't think we had you on long ago, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, wasn't it? So it must have been pretty much just before. Just before. So what are your general thoughts on the situation with Tuchel going and then getting Potter in to replace him?
The original, so it was literally like the morning after that Champions League loss to Dynamo. And I was just in complete shock when I saw the news, because I thought the one person that was safe in all of this takeover process was Tuchel, considering it's just left basically Todd Burley on his own because he sacked everyone at this point. So I thought that Tuchel was like the one mainstay. So originally finding out the news, it was a massive shock to me. I didn't think it was the right decision. I still don't think it's the right decision. But in terms of bringing in Potter, I think out of the options, he was definitely the best available, in my personal opinion. I've liked him. I've liked what he's done at Brighton. I think if he gets time, which at Chelsea we'll have to wait and see. But if he gets time, I think it will end up being a good managerial choice. And obviously, the stuff that's come out this week since the sacking about Burley and Tuchel not really getting along, not seeing eye to eye on quite a lot of things, it makes the sacking make a bit more sense than it originally did when it just happened on Thursday. That was like just a reaction to a few bad results, but it's obviously been brewing in the background for a little while now, and just need to get him out and get someone new in, basically.
I think it's very much invested in the process again, isn't it? Kind of we spoke about on last week's pod about Arsenal have kind of built a process that is around their system. United are trying to do it. It's probably going to be similar with Chelsea, where they want to build that like long-term kind of way of playing rather than just the quick sackings that they've done before. So it'll be interesting to see if your owner's got more patience than the previous one. Not so far what we've seen, but yeah, like you said, there's been a lot of disagreements. I think there was even a disagreement around signing Ronaldo, which Tuchel might have been right on that one, but but we'll see how that one goes. But I was going to say, from an FPL point of view, you've made the point that your game's off, so really, I'm assuming you think from an FPL point of view, just wait and see a few weeks and see kind of how they go with the new Potter system. I don't expect we're thinking that there's going to be a lot of changes to kind of personnel or anyone they'll favour, and it's difficult to tell at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all down to just getting into the system and getting it sorted. But for a few weeks in FPL, it might be better off without a Chelsea player. I'm not sure about them now.
Yeah, but probably if anyone, just go with Reece James and just forget about everyone else. And now, because you'd think in the system that it generally played Potter that I think James would be the best option, even if he plays a 4 or 5 back. So I don't think I'd advise anyone outside of James until we see how they're going to perform. Charlie, what are your thoughts of that appointment for Chelsea from an outside point of view? I know you're a good fan of Potter from previous discussions, so.
I had a bit of an affinity for Brighton. I live in the area, so I kind of watch them almost as a second team, if you can have a second team in the same league. I have been really interested by what Potter's been doing at Brighton. I think the main issue I can think of, and Pete kind of alluded to it there, is that it took Potter a while at Brighton to get things actually, like, it was only really this season that the results were actually matching the performances in terms of getting points. And the issue at Chelsea is that he's going to be expected to win things pretty quickly. The amount of money that's gone into that squad now, I think it's something like a net spend of 200 million. And obviously, that's not really Potter's fault, or he didn't have any control, obviously, over the signings. Although there was some suggestion that there was some talks going on a little bit before as well. So that's the likes of Cucurella going. There was some suggestion that there was a link there, but. Yeah, I don't know. I just, in my mind, I just don't see a way this plays out where Potter will get enough time to actually deliver what he can do. I think if they were prepared to kind of stick by him for the long term, I think it would be a really, really good move, and it would put Chelsea in the best of places they could probably be. I think the issue is going to be the fact that they're too heavily invested now to be able to support someone for that long without delivering immediately. So I think that will be the issue. The difference for a team like, for example, Arsenal, we've been able to stick with Arteta is because we've maybe not had the same level of expectations as someone like a team like Chelsea. Chelsea are expecting to win things, obviously come off the back recently of a Champions League win and things like that. Whereas Arteta and Arsenal, really the expectation is just try and achieve top four if possible, and progress from there. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. But yeah, I would be, to be honest, quite surprised if he does last, because I just can't see a way in which they give him enough time.
They actually decide to give them time. That's the main thing that we've all kind of mentioned. So, be interesting one to see, and I'm sure from Pete's point of view, he hopes he does get time and can create something. From his point of view. So we've touched on the kind of postponements. I guess we better look at a bit of FPL and the havoc it's causing with these postponements. So we go back to you, Pete. Before we even dive into transfers or anything, because of the postponements, how does your FPL team look going into this week before we make any changes?
I've got 2 free transfers, and I've currently got 9 people playing, but that does include a Danny Ward to Tottenham away. So I'm kind of in a limbo right now on whether it is just use a couple free transfers or go with the wild card. I'm not convinced on either at the moment.
That sounds very similar with the Ward dilemma that I've got as well.
It is, yeah.
From your 9 playing players, are they decent options as well, or is there some like bench players that you've just had to throw in for who are the players that you've got out? Is it Liverpool?
Yeah, so it's I've got no Trent, no Salah, no James, no Aronson for Leeds, and obviously Sanchez in goal. But yeah, so Andreas Pereira and Nico Williams are currently in there playing, but they are playing each other, so I can see points in that game, so that doesn't worry me as much as they're playing a bigger team. So I'm all right rolling with that at the moment. So I think I will just end up using the 2 free transfers, because after this game week, if I'm not mistaken, it is an international break. Or at least it's coming up soon. So I think that's when I would be more inclined to use the wild card and just use these 2 free transfers, do whatever I want for this week, and then wild card it and do what I need to do for after the break.
Yeah, I'm not a million miles away from where you are, but currently I can actually get a full team out, which I was quite impressed at. So I can't play my 3 Liverpool assets and then Sanchez. So the same as you, I've got Ward in goal, which I'm not quite sure about. And I've got Andreas, Williams both playing. And I've also got Bailey and Gibbs White playing as well. So you could say there's some suspect players in there. So I think I'm in position exactly the same as you, where I'm probably going to look to use those 2 transfers. Robertson was always going to go anyway, and now he's injured as well. So it's going to be Robertson, and then I need to decide on the other option from my point of view where I'm going to go. But that's where I might need some help from you guys later on as well, trying to work out great picks where we need to go from. But yeah, very similar situation between us two then. What about you, Charlie?
Yeah, so kind of similar boat. I've got I've used one of my 2 free transfers this week already, which brings me to 9 definite starters. One of which is Nico Williams. The rest I'd be fairly happy with playing. I'd prefer to bench Williams if I could, depending on players. I could stretch to an extra player if I've got Walker, but by the sounds of it, he's not even going to be travelling for the Champions League game, so I'm expecting him to be out probably. So yeah, we'll see. Really, I've kind of been tossing up between all the different potential options in terms of using transfers, taking a hit, or using the wild card. But yeah, we'll see. I don't think it's the worst position to be in, particularly as you would imagine a lot of people, everyone else basically is in the same situation. But I think it's probably just more exciting to revamp the squad and go for the wild card. So I think that's it's good. It's growing more and more appealing by the day.
Sure, that's the total reasoning behind why I should wildcard, but I get what you mean. I've got that's completely went out of my head what the question was then. So, in terms of amount of players, keeping with you, Charlie, is there kind of a minimum you'd want out for this week? Say if someone had 7 players and 2 free transfers, so if we get to 9, would you just be saying wildcard straight away if you've only got 9 players, or would you depend on the quality of those players you've got?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think it probably depends on which players and kind of across which teams. Because I think looking at the fixtures, maybe we'll go into a bit more in later in the podcast. But looking at specific fixtures that I'd want to target, I'd probably be looking at, I guess, Man City, Spurs, Arsenal as the kind of main ones, and maybe Fulham as well as the main teams you'd want to be covering. So yeah, I guess it kind of is team dependent really. If you've got 9 players across, mostly from those teams, then I'd maybe be considering holding if possible. But equally, and again, we'll probably come onto this a bit more later in terms of my reasoning, but I've been trying to compare what my decision making would be if I weren't to use my wild card and likely using it in game week 9, or if I was going to wild card this week, and it's not too far off anyway. So I'm that kind of maybe just gives me a suggestion that I should just wild card this week and carry the transfer over into the international break.
If any of these transfer plans and wildcard plans will change the fact that Salah's just scored in the Champions League. Just to keep it in the back of your head, those people that don't want to keep Salah in the team, that's quite perfect timing there. Interesting that Jota's back in that game as well, which could cause some issues with the other Liverpool assets, but we'll see going forward.
I don't think it's any surprise that Salah's scored pretty quickly when Núñez isn't starting. I think that might be a key part of that.
But he has struggled all season even when he's not been in there, has he?
True, but it's certainly from when you watch the games and Núñez is starting it looks very much like there's a very different role trying to fit Núñez in.
He has tended to get quite a few of his goals while Núñez has been in the team now, hasn't he? At the same time, he seemed to benefit from a few knockdowns from Núñez. So I get what you mean. I think he's forced a bit more wide, isn't he? When Núñez is playing, he's not kind of the main man. So it can go like you can see that if they have a lineup like tonight, you just never know with the front three who's going to play when they're all fit. So it's still not a bad asset by any means, but I think it's that kind of 13 million price tag, isn't it, where you can get so much value in other positions that people are reconsidering if Salah should be in the team. But I'm sure it'll bite us back in at least 1 or 2 game weeks, not even more than that later down the line. But it's an interesting dilemma because I think a majority of the drafts I've seen don't have Salah in, obviously because of this week in blanking. So it's just the thing to watch out for if you do dump off Salah. He's always lurking around, isn't he? He's always that type of player who play terrible and then he'll get like 2 returns. Like that previous week where he got an assist off his shoulder, that was just typical Salah. But we shall see. So as we kind of don't have a break in between this with looking back on the previous game, we're going to have the quiz pretty early, guys. So we're going to put a quiz in now and then we're going to look at more wildcard stuff after the quiz. And I know you both have been looking forward to it, so I don't want to leave it too long. So you had quite a rivalry last time when we had Arsenal versus Chelsea, so I've carried on the same theme. So, and to link in with that, it's also a Champions League night. So it's with regards to the Champions League. So we're going to be looking at Champions League goal scorers for Arsenal and Chelsea. So the highest goal scoring players for both of these clubs. So I've got 22 players here who have scored at least 8 Champions League games. Scored at least 8 goals for Arsenal and Chelsea. And when I say Champions League, I just mean since 1992-1993, not going back into historical European competition. I had to go quite down on this list to get 22 players. I'm not saying that says anything about your clubs at all, but so basically anyone who scored 8 or more goals in the Champions League for Arsenal or Chelsea, there's 22 in total, so you're both going to take it in turns. There are more Arsenal answers than there are Chelsea, so I'm going to let Pete go first, just to kind of try and negate that kind of issue. But if you do get an answer wrong, you're out. That's clean cut. You're out. I'm not giving any chances. If you repeat
straight out.
If you repeat what someone says, I will give you one thing. So like, I was trying to think of a random player, but if like, obviously this doesn't make sense. If Peter said Ronaldo a few answers ago and Charlie said Ronaldo again, I will let them off once. But if you give an answer that's incorrect, you're completely out. And there are some very interesting names here. Just putting it out there, they've got 7 Champions League goals, so it might put a curveball in there for you. So if you both understand the rules, you're fine with that?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, so there's 22.
Was it 6 or more, or 7 or more goals?
8.
8.
Hey, was it 8?
8 or more, yeah.
Pay attention, Pete.
There's quite a few interesting players on 7. So there are there's 22 players from either side. Well, I'll actually say there's 12 from Arsenal, 10 from Chelsea, who have got 8 or more goals. So over to you, Pete, to start.
Okay, I'm going to just take Henri.
Still one of the Arsenal ones early, that is correct.
In that case, I'll go Drogba.
That is also correct. This is not a bonus question, but who's got more goals in the Champions League?
Ooh, Drogba.
Henri.
I knew that was going to happen. Drogba's got 1 more.
Oh.
So he's the better player.
They're the highest for both teams. Drogba had 36 and Henri had 35.
Ooh.
Right, so back to you, Pete, and I'll honour my hydrate to Hills in the chat.
I will go with Lampard.
Also correct.
Anelka.
That is correct as well.
Van Persie.
Also correct. You're just going down each of his lists here.
I'm trying to knock off as many Chelseas as I can.
I was considering giving bonus points, but then I thought I won't do that because it'll be a bit difficult for Pete if you just took all his answers and there's only 10 anyway.
Yeah.
Theo Walcott.
That's correct. Continuing down the list, you've both got 3 each and you've knocked off the 3 top of both club.
Timo Werner.
He has 8 goals. Joined at the bottom of the list. I had to
brave going with Werner.
I had to double check that one because I was a bit like, is this right or not? But he's go on, Pete. Sorry, go on, Charlie.
You sure that's not including offside goals?
Well,
he's actually not
it'll be like 30 if it includes that.
He's actually not got a bad record in the Champions League for Chelsea. I think he played 2 seasons and got 4 goals in each season. So
yeah, he was good for us in that.
That is correct.
Let's go with Willian.
That is correct. He's just going down the list of Chelsea assets here.
Just going for the obvious Chelsea ones.
I will go with Giroud.
Giroud is on there.
Okay.
For which club did he score more than?
It'll be Arsenal, it's not Chelsea.
Yeah, it was lower down on the Chelsea list, but I think it was 6, I think, for Chelsea around that number.
Let's go with Podolski.
Another player with 8 goals, right on the cusp. Is correct. You've got 10 out of 22 so far.
I'll go for the other Chelsea legend, Cesc Fabregas.
Of course you mean Arsenal by that, and he is up there with 13. Fourth on the list for Arsenal, so well up there.
Let's go with Alexis Sanchez.
He's on there with 9.
Fernando Torres.
Yep, another one with double figures at 10 for Chelsea.
Let's try and knock off another Chelsea. I'm assuming Hazard would have got there.
Is that what you're going with?
Yeah, Hazard.
He had 8 as well, so right at the bottom.
Nice.
Good gameplay in here, trying to get rid of the Chelsea guys.
A bit of a brilliant player manager, Freddie Lundberg.
That is correct. He also had 13 joint with Fabregas.
Well, sticking with the Invincibles era, let's go with Bobby Perez.
That is correct. I wonder where he was going. He said Bobby then. I was like, where's he going here? I missed someone from this list. You've only got 6 left, and it's actually 3 of each. So Charlie's not actually doing that good well with the getting the Chelsea ones. And of the 6 options left, 5 of them have got 8 goals right at the bottom. One of them's got 10.
10.
I was a bit surprised.
I will go with a much beloved Arsenal player, Emmanuel Adebayor.
He's one of them on 8. That's correct.
I am. Oh, that might be a bit of a risk. I don't know. I'm going to leave that one for now. I'll come back to that if I have to. I've got a lot of possibles in my head, but nothing definite. I'm pretty sure the Lord Nicholas Bentner has got a few. I'm not sure how many, but that would have been the right sort of era. So I'm going to go Bentner.
But is he the Lord and Saviour? That is the question. He has got 8 goals, and he's right down there.
I seem to remember he might have got a hat trick at one point against someone really rubbish. I can't remember who it was.
Yeah, right at the bottom on the 8. So you've got 1 Arsenal player left, 3 Chelsea, and you've still not got a player with 10 goals.
I think I am about to get him though, because I've just remembered John Terry.
John Terry is the one with 10 goals, which...
that was going to be my risk one. Wasn't sure.
I was confident.
Penalties again.
Right, so Pete is ahead by 1, and there's 3 answers left.
Oh, yes.
Am I allowed to ask again for the how many of each?
There is 2 Chelsea and 1 Arsenal, and they've all got 8 goals.
2 Chelsea, 1 Arsenal. Okay. I am going to go for... Question is whether I go for... I don't think I know the last 2 Chelsea well enough, so I think I'll have to take a stab at Aaron Ramsey.
That is correct. That is the last Arsenal player.
I did not think that was right.
He's scored an absolute screamer. It was against Galatasaray. I'd highly recommend anyone look that up. Absolutely. Oh no, it might be Olympiacos. Can't remember, but absolute screamer. I suggest.
I thought you might have said one of the ones with 7, but I'll keep them up my sleeve in case Pete doesn't get this right. Because you currently
they're both Chelsea. Yeah.
Yeah, you currently level, and one of you has to name one to win. Well, I'm assuming you're not going to get both. Like, if you both name one of them, I'd be very impressed if you got. I'm just putting it out there. But it's back to you, Pete.
got a few players in my head. Can I like? So at the moment, my thought process is between Ivanovic, who I know will be up there, Oscar.
I'm going to say you might not
We've
want to
got-
give your thought process because Charlie needs
Oh,
to
yeah,
name one
yeah.
after.
I'm not giving my
Go
thought.
ahead, mate. Go ahead.
Well, I've said Ivanovic, but I think he's a defender, or risk it on an attacker. So I will go with a man who got 2 goals in his debut in the Champions League against Juventus for Chelsea, and that's Oscar.
Oscar has got 8 goals. That is correct.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Right, come on, Oscar, get the last one.
So yeah, Charlie has to get the last one to draw and take it to a tiebreaker. And it's a Chelsea player.
Well, the obvious logic would be go for Ivanovic now.
Really going to go 2-0 down to me, Marsh, in the quizzes. That's bad.
Well, I think getting to the end and having to name a Chelsea player as well is probably a pretty good show.
So it's good effort from both of you, like Hills has said as well. So can't be ashamed, but I'm sure Charlie doesn't want to make it 2-0 down.
I don't, but I've got at this point, all I'm doing is just thinking of Chelsea players. I don't know if any of them would have been able to pass 8 or not. I'm just going to have to take a guess. I'm going to go in honour of the new FIFA coming out soon. I am going to go with a big... I can't remember what FIFA it was. I'm going to go with Ramirez as a stab in the dark. No idea.
Ramirez had 7 goals.
No.
Get out there.
That's even worse. I wish I'd got someone that was like 5 or 4 or something.
Ivanovic also had 7 goals, so if Pete went with
Okay.
Ivanovic, he would have lost on that as well. I wasn't expecting either of you to get the number 8. Any other guesses, Pete? It's going back a bit.
Okay, well, my other guess was Salomon Kalou, but I'm guessing that's not far enough.
Kalou also had 7.
Okay.
It was Torre Andre Flo.
Oh my god!
Which is an
I would never have even guessed.
No chance.
Exactly. I don't think any of you would ever get that one.
How did he get to 8? He wouldn't have played that many games.
I always had a good record.
Yeah.
I'll have to look at what seasons it was in, but yeah, I was amazed by that one. Just for a bit of reassurance, Charlie, there was 2 Arsenal players on 7. Do you want to name them? Have you got any idea?
Arsenal players on 7. If you hadn't kind of said that was the end of the Arsenal players, my next guess for an Arsenal player would have probably been Ozil. So I imagine he's around there.
Yeah, Ozil is 7.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure on the other one though.
Any ideas, Pete?
Jack Wilshere.
Quite a big player from around Henry's era.
Bergkamp?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so when you was thinking about Ramsey, I was like, is he going to say one of these Ozil or Bergkamp? Because they're all like within 1 goal of each other. So, yeah. But yeah, you both did very well there. Unfortunately, Charlie, you've gone 2-0 down.
That's fine. I take no issues with losing like that. That's fine.
Yeah, you both put on a good show, so we can't really say anything about that. Yeah, well played, Pete. 2-0 lead.
Thank you very much.
Considering there's more Arsenal players as well, we'll give you that one.
Mm.
Just if we want to continue our Liverpool updates, they've conceded an equaliser. Just to continue the...
It's gone down the right flank as well, as far as what the information I've got.
What a surprise. That's all we can say there. But yeah, we'll move on for that. And we'll move on planning for next week, which should be absolute carnage in FPL. So we've mentioned about wildcards, so I think that's a perfect time to talk about wildcards. So I thought we could just discuss some players in different positions, kind of what would be targeted on a wildcard, which could also link to kind of transfers that me and Pete were thinking of that kind of trying to cover off some of those wildcard players. So I feel like, Charlie, you're the most close to a wildcard. And just to note as well that Sam is currently debating if the wildcard or not. He sent us a few drafts earlier, so he could be playing a wildcard this week, so we might be seeing how well that went during the international break. But yeah, to start with you, Charlie, if we're thinking of a wildcard, is there certain standout players that you don't have now that you're looking to bring in, like a good 3 or 4 kind of big changes that you're looking at?
Well, I think the obvious big change is getting rid of Salah and or Trent. And yeah, I think like we talked about the last time we were on, the wildcards is the best way to do that, really, because it allows you to properly use those funds rather than just in a kind of like for like move, or well, obviously there's not really anyone like for like for Salah, but doing sort of 2 different transfers. The wildcard allows you to spread it out across the squad. I think most drafts I've seen, both we've seen Sam's, the kind of ones that I've done as well, there's usually still a fairly big hitter in the midfield somewhere. So whether that's your kind of De Bruyne or Son or someone around that price, just in case we ever do need to get back to him, you've kind of got somewhere to go from. I think pretty much every squad I've seen has Mitrovic, and at this point it doesn't really feel like there's a reason not to. Considering his price, considering the fixture against Forest this week and a fairly good run going forwards for Fulham, that seems a pretty nailed on move. And then I think there's just a few other kind of value picks around that I've seen. So people moving to Trippier again as well. I think that's a fairly obvious move. That's what I've used one of my free transfers this week on anyway. So even if I don't wildcard, I'll have Trippier. Quite a few looking to do the double up in defence as well and get Pope in goal, which I think makes sense. Not just from... Yeah, it's not always a great idea to double up in defence, particularly on teams outside your kind of traditional top 4 kind of teams. But I think if you just look at in isolation at the goalkeepers, Pope seems to have the best upside in terms of both clean sheet potential and saves. So I think he makes the most sense in goal. And then around that, yeah, it's just kind of keeping your main picks together. I think Haaland's the obvious permanent captain for a long time now, which kind of allows you to get rid of Salah. So I think from that perspective, it makes sense. Yeah, Haaland, and then build around that from your slightly less than premium around the rest of the squad. With my own draft that I've put together, I've also, and I've said I can see Sam has done the same in his draft, has included James in the squad, even though obviously he won't play this week. It makes sense with the fixtures going forward for Chelsea, and like we said earlier, James will play a part regardless of whether it's as a right back, as a right centre back, right wing back, whatever it is. He'll be in that team for sure because of his quality. So he seems to make the most sense going forward from that Chelsea team.
Out some of those comments now then. And I thought I may as well start a goalkeeper because I know that me and Pete are both in a situation where we've got to play a Ward. So it seems like a logical place to start.
I think that says it all, really.
Yeah. Well, but me and Pete both have got Sanchez and Ward, so we're very much being forced into it. But are you leaning towards making a transfer on the goalkeeper to bring in someone like Pope, and would he be number 1 option for you, Pete, if he was going for a goalkeeper? Cool.
Yeah, I would say if I was to take out Ward for this week, it would be Nick Pope, just because he's been good all year in general, but also at home to Bournemouth, it looks like basically the best opportunity you're going to get a clean sheet in the league at the moment. But that would be at the cost of a hit for me if I wasn't going to do a wild card, and it's just weighing up whether I think Pope can make up the 4 points or more to the Danny Ward points, which he probably will do, to be honest, because Danny Ward. But it's just weighing it all up in that kind of area, really.
Yeah, it's if you can ever trust Danny Ward or the heartbreak we've had beforehand, and I think it's tempting with Ward to just keep with him because the 2 fixtures after this Spurs game are really nice. I think it's Fulham and Bournemouth, so you can get very much tempted into just getting through it and relying on him, but we've tried that before.
Are you telling me Mitrovic doesn't score against Leicester?
I'm not saying that.
That seems like the most nailed on thing I can think of.
But Bournemouth, you think if you're going to keep a clean sheet against anyone, maybe, but you can't keep a clean sheet against anyone, can you, so far? So it's just a point I was throwing up there to be impartial, and kind of the dilemma is kind of, do you really want to spend a transfer on a goalkeeper when you could enhance somewhere else? Because I, for example, in my team, Charlie, I could have the option of either getting Mitrovic in or getting Pope in, and it's like that's going against either side of the argument, which is quite funny. But yeah, I think when I've been looking at goalkeepers, it would only be Pope or maybe Ederson that I'd be going for, just because it would be quite nice to have that double City defence. But I'm not convinced I want to use all that funds in the goalkeeper department, but it's one to think about. If we stay with you, Pete, as well, if you was on a wild card, what would your front three be? Like we've talked about Mitrovic and Haaland, would it be those two plus someone else?
Haaland is just a guarantee at this point for anyone's FPL team if you want to do well. Mitrovic for the price seems to be the best, but it's that third striker that's really interesting because Isaac, especially with having his next game as Bournemouth, looks a really good option. Ivan Toney coming off the hat-trick a couple of weeks ago, and he's still got not too bad fixtures after this Arsenal one. He's still got them Bournemouth, Newcastle, Brighton without Potter now. So he's still looking good fixtures-wise. I feel like people are just going to move on from Jesus at this point just because of Arsenal's upcoming fixtures after this week. And I feel like that'll be what I do as well. And I don't think I'll be alone in that. But even though he's good value, I feel get rid of him for a few weeks for this tough run. And he will definitely be coming back into the team at some point. But there's just better strikers with better fixture options for now that I will be switching to. And I think it would be, I would go with Toney as my third striker with Mitrovic and Haaland at this point.
Seems like Toney's in my lineup. Yeah, because I look at my front three of Haaland, Toney and Jesus, and I'm like, is that man really that far away from a wild card? You might want to do Jesus to Mitrovic, but Jesus is away at Brentford. I think Brentford will concede a few, so I'm not that upset with my forward line going into this week, especially having gotten Toney in quite a while ago. So I'm not too upset with my front three. Who would your third striker be, Charlie? Would it be Isaac rather than Toney?
Yeah, I've been debating basically those three options. I can see the benefits of all of them. I think so my current squad, without doing anything to it, has Jesus in, and I don't think there's any issues with that. But certainly for this week, I could also see an argument in which if you didn't want to play the wildcard, or maybe you've already used it and you have other areas that you want to take care of, yes, those are probably some of the worst fixtures in a row in terms of between game week 9 and 12. Arsenal play Spurs, Liverpool and Man City in 3 out of the 4 games. The maybe one argument you could say is that all of those games are at home, in which we've been able to build a really good atmosphere. I can see us scoring in all of those, to be honest. The way defences are in the league at the moment, I wouldn't put it out of the question that we score in all of those games. So I think it makes sense to get rid of Jesus. But equally, I can see an argument in which if you don't have the transfer spare to be able to do it, it's not the worst player to leave in if you have to. In terms of my own team, if I don't make any changes or don't wildcard, then I'll leave him in this week and probably get rid of him in a game week 9 wildcard. If I wildcard this week, similarly, I've looked at potential ideas of keeping him in this week and then transferring him out to someone like Toney, probably the game week 9 because of the Brentford against Bournemouth fixture. If I was going to be making a different decision specifically for game week 8, so if I was going to wildcard game week 8 and wanted to get rid of Jesus, I think I'd go Isaac just because of that. Again, that Bournemouth fixture, it just is so appealing from an attacking point of view. And I think the fact that you both want to go for Toney makes me want to go for Isaac even more.
Yeah, I like Isaac for this week, but I'm wary that Wilson's back in training. That I'm a bit wary of him maybe being forced out wide. But they've spent a lot of money on him, so it won't surprise me if they tried like a 2 up front, or he was the more favoured player, and especially after an international break, gives Wilson a bit more time to get back. That's a bit I'm wary of.
I think there's always going to be an injury doubt over Wilson, which goes for Isaac. And also, if we remember, and this may be a bit of a stretch, but if we remember back to Howe's Bournemouth team, particularly in that kind of golden era of Callum Wilson and Josh King up front, and Josh King was a bit of an FPL legend at that time, Isaac could perform a similar role. And we know Howe's used to up top previously. He's mentioned using it before. Obviously, another kind of big factor of this is about St. Maximan's fitness and how he then fits into the side. Probably doesn't really work as a 2 up top if St. Maximan's playing. Really wants to play a front 3 if he's fit. But yeah, I think Isak starts no matter what. It's just like you say, he might get pushed out a bit more wide if Wilson's fit to play and Howe wants to start him.
It's one of those uncertainty things. I think that's why I'd be slightly against the wildcard this week, because you're wildcarding a week before the international break, and then you've got a whole 2 weeks where anything could happen. Half your players could get injured on international duty, and then you've already used your wildcard. So I'm slightly saying that I kind of like wildcarding over the international break rather than this week, but it obviously depends on the situation with people's teams.
Whilst I agree in general as well, and that's traditionally what I've always done and what I had planned to do before all these postponements, can we remember a time that we've ever had maybe more than 2 injuries over an international break? I can't. Just thinking just now, and I've not really done any research into this, but that it's always the line, and I say it myself as well, in terms of, you've got to protect yourself against potential injuries and playing games and whatever, but I can't actually remember a time where it's been like, oh, thank goodness I'm using my wildcard, I've got like 2 or 3 injuries necessarily over an international break. Maybe it has happened. I just can't think of one particular example in recent memory.
I feel like it's less of a factor this season as well, because everyone's so cheap that a lot of the wildcard teams I see, that they have 15 players who could legitimately play. A lot of the time we have like an Archer or someone that we had started the season where they're never going to play. They might get 1 point every now and then, but I think most of the teams I've seen, that all the players would play anyway, so you have to be unlucky and get about 5 injuries to even cause you an issue. So yeah, I get that argument at the same time. It's a funny one. I don't think, if the postponements obviously didn't happen, I don't think people would be rushing towards it, but it's been forced upon us, of course, given the situation. So it makes it even more interesting at the same time. But yeah, I think it's definitely that third striker spot, isn't it? I think the Mitrovic's value just makes him the one to go for. Yeah, I think on Mitrovic though, I don't know what you guys think. If he didn't have Nottingham Forest next, and he had Newcastle and West Ham the 2 fixtures after, I'm not sure everyone would go to Mitrovic straight away. They might have some like Isaac in and then go to Mitrovic. I don't know what you think on that one, Pete. If he didn't have Nottingham Forest the next game, if people would be going to him as quickly.
I think he's shown that he can score against anyone. He's done it at Tottenham, he's done it at Arsenal. So I still think, no, maybe there'll be not as many people, but he's clearly shown that he's good enough to score against anyone away from home, at home. So I still think he'd be the most popular.
Also, at the risk of repeating myself, after Newcastle West Ham, it's our good friends Bournemouth again.
yeah, obviously hypothetical as if he only had those 2 next, but yeah. If I don't bring him in now, this game week, I would probably wait until that Bournemouth fixture. That's the kind of point I was trying to make. Maybe go like Tony to Mitrovic at that point.
I also think, though, with the Mitrovic thing as well, that one of those games being away to Newcastle, that'd be one of the games he's looked at thinking he wants to go on, put a show and get a goal in that one as much as anything this season.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for him because he's on like a goal a game, isn't he, at the minute? And you'd think naturally there's going to be a drop off some point. So I'm wondering if we're going to see that drop off over the next few weeks, or you feel like it's got to hit at some point because you can't imagine Mitrovic getting 38 goals in the season. So at some point there's got to be a dip, hasn't somewhere. Imagine he gets 38 goals in the season and still doesn't get golden boot because Haaland's been like 50. But yeah, I think that's covered the strikers quite well. And just before we go into the other positions, Pete, give us, so we've talked about you having 2 transfers. What kind of positions are you looking at making those moves? Is it midfield, defence?
It's interesting because I'm either going to wildcard this week or wildcard next week. I'm certain on that. And I think if I didn't wildcard this week, it would just be I can just get out the 2 most expensive players that aren't playing, which in my case would be Trent and Salah. and get whoever I want for this week just for this one fixture, because I can change them if I have to after that. But at the moment, I'm looking at, I think Trippier definitely being one of them for this one game week. And then the other one would be a toss-up between going from Salah to De Bruyne or going from my third striker, which is Archer, who he does have a game but he won't be playing, the Villa striker, and going from Archer to Mitrovic. And I think I'm leaning more towards Salah to De Bruyne at this stage. Literally just for this one game week if I was to not do the wildcard.
Interesting one for the game week. I guess it depends on the Champions League as well, doesn't it? In terms of
Yeah,
PPP. But yeah, I don't mind it as a 1 week punt, and I saw that Spurs have just lost as well, so there's no temptation to get like a Spurs asset in there instead of a KDB. But yeah, I can't think of anyone else who would really stand out. Is there anyone else you'd be picking if you're doing a 1 week punt in terms of that, Charlie?
No, it's just the ones we talked about, really. I think, yeah, I've already used one transfer and it's Trent that's gone to Trippier, so like we've already talked about, really. My drafts so far have had Son, but I've just been reading through a few of the kind of talks about the game you mentioned tonight, and it sounds like he had an absolute shocker again.
It was shocking.
Yeah. Went completely missing and they got subs in the 73rd minute or something. So, yeah, that gives me no confidence, even though it's Leicester. That gives me no real confidence. You know, it's absolutely possible that he gets dropped this weekend. We saw Kulusevski drop previously. It sounds like he had an all right game when he came on this evening. So maybe it's Son's turn this week, and maybe it's Richarlison, Kane, Kulusevski for this game. You'd still expect that to be a strong enough team to beat Leicester anyway, and it just gives Son a bit of time off and time to recollect. So I think, yeah, for me, I'm probably looking at using the second transfer on Salah out for Kevin De Bruyne, particularly against that Wolves defence. You just kind of think of they've still been a pretty good defence, and it will take someone like De Bruyne either just creating something ridiculous like he does, or again taking a sort of outside of the box shot and scoring that way. So yeah, as a 1 week punt, De Bruyne I think makes sense, particularly if you're getting rid of Salah because he's got no fixture. You may as well use that money.
Scored 4 goals at Wolves last year as well.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Nailed in then.
That's all I had running through my head there. It was literally like game week 38, wasn't it? It was right at the end of the season. Did I say 38? I meant 36. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. But while we're on dilemmas, let's talk about my team as well, shall we? So, my current plan. So I probably want to use the 2 free transfers. Like I said, I've got a full playing team, but I'm just not convinced by it. And I've got 3 Liverpool assets: Robertson, Trent, Salah, and then Sanchez, who obviously can't play as well. So the idea is Robertson is definitely getting binned. And then, well, I'm not really even sure who to go for in that defence, because currently my defence sits at, let me get it up. So my defence currently is Cancelo, Trippier, and Nico Williams. So I feel like the obvious one would have been to Trippier, obviously if you didn't have Cancelo. So I'm currently either thinking get James in for the week after, but then that's not really saving me an issue this week, because ideally I want someone who is playing in case one of these starting 11 doesn't play, like Bailey. You know what he's like, not getting on the pitch when you want him. So I think I want a defender that's playing. So I've been scouring through different options, and I'm not fully convinced that the fact I've got the Luca Dean is getting to a stressful time. I've even considered going down to Emerson for West Ham, because that frees up me some more funds to potentially go in then. So if I went Emerson in defence for Robertson, then I would change Sanchez for Pope, and then the week after it would allow me enough funds to get an 8 million midfielder. So to go Gibbs White to like Maddison. So that's the kind of thing I'm eyeing up at the minute. But then that would mean keeping Salah and Trent for the weeks to come, which I'm not an issue with. Everyone's selling them, so I may as well keep them and take the advantage while you can, because you're not going to get it often this season. But I'm just very hesitant of leaving all those funds for Salah on the bench. But I guess it is only 1 week, and then I can reassess. Have you guys got any input on that? The main one for me is a defender. Is there a standout defender you guys would get who is playing this week? Like, who isn't Trippier or Cancelo or Nico Williams?
Can't see it myself, really. I was just looking through to try and work out. I don't know where else you can see a guaranteed clean sheet unless you were to double up, because, Man City and Newcastle seem the obvious ones, which is the ones you've got. Outside of that, you're just taking punts, really. It's whether you go for like an Everton defence, which by all accounts isn't great. It's been improving, but Pickford's, I think, is still going to be out.
Yeah.
You go on the flip side of that maybe and go West Ham, like you said, Emerson, more for the value, which makes probably the most sense, I think, in my mind, particularly if your plan's still not to use the wildcard for a little bit longer. It makes sense to move those funds around and do those kind of moves you're talking about, where you can jump on someone like Maddison or some other 8 million midfielder if they stand out. I think that's probably the way I'd go, because I think the rest of the games I can't see any guaranteed clean sheets that make it a must to get in that defender, unless you're going to try and go a different route, maybe rather than going Pope and go for the double Newcastle defence or something like that. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think Emerson probably makes the most sense in my head, and that's why he's in my game week 8 draft team for a wild card.
Yeah, I think it's more for a value point of view, because I don't think he's going to play every single game, especially when Cresswell comes back. So it's, I think, just getting the value. Obviously, going Robertson to Emerson creates a lot of value. So it would also fix the goalkeeper issue, because I don't really see a goalkeeper that I'd want outside of Pope currently, except for Edison, which obviously is using more money and means I wouldn't be able to get that £8 million midfielder. So that is the current way I'm leaning towards, or it'll simply be get a defender in and then Salah to like KDB, like you guys have said. But I quite like the idea of having Salah and Trent when no one else has got them. I don't mind. I think the fixture after the international break is home to Brighton. I don't expect Brighton to be the same kind of team afterwards. So I'm quite happy to play against people with Trent and Salah. Is there anything else you would do in that situation, Pete? Anyone else that stands out in defence? I think when I was looking, it was like West Ham or Aston Villa. That's literally what I'd got down to. And like, they don't really inspire me a lot.
I would say outside of the Man City Newcastle, I think the next best one would be Arsenal, personally, just because they've got quite a decent defence. You can still go value of someone like a Saliba if you wanted to, or take a punt on one of the others. And then that even gives you Ramsdale if you want a goalkeeper. But yeah, it's hard with the defence this week because you can't see many clean sheets out there. Even the Man City one isn't a guaranteed clean sheet away to Wolves, in my opinion. But yeah, I think Arsenal would be a better shout than an Everton or West Ham or Villa, in my opinion.
What do you think on that one, Charlie? Arsenal going forward into their room.
Never thought I'd hear the day that Pete recommends an Arsenal defender.
They're top of the league.
Thank you. I think only if you were locked in on a game week 9 wildcard, then yes, I would have no issues going with an Arsenal defender for this week as a 1 week punt. It also sounds like we're getting Thomas Partey back. Sounds like he's in full training, has been for a while, which is going to make a huge improvement on our defence. So I could see us getting a clean sheet from that game, probably, like you said, more than a lot of the other teams. But I think it's just coming back to that issue of if you're going to not be playing the wild card after that, you then have to run through Spurs, Liverpool and Man City in 3 out of 4 weeks, which, like I said earlier, I think we could get some attacking returns from, but I'm pretty sure we'll concede in all of those, and the Leeds game as well in between. So, yeah, I think as a 1 week punt, maybe, but I'm not sure I'd see it for a longer term pick.
I don't think I'll go to Arsenal. Like you said, if I'm going to like a game week 12 kind of period, I'm not convinced there'll be many clean sheets in there. So even just taking a punt on a cheaper kind of West Ham asset might get me a few points that I'm not, and it'll save me a bit of value. So yeah, you might convince me into going for Emerson, but I'm sure I'll think about it over the next few days. I think Pope might possibly go up in price tonight, so that's a thing I need to consider as well. I'm trying to think if I don't think I've even got enough funds to be able. I think I have to make the move down to Emerson to free up the money for Pope, so that might be the issue. I'll have to check on that afterwards. But if we continue where we were saying about wildcards, so if we go to defence, well, we've kind of just touched on defence, so might not be much to talk about. So I think we've said Cancelo and Trippier are kind of guaranteed to be in there. We've mentioned Emerson as well. Charlie mentioned keeping James till next week. in your kind of drafts, Charlie? Who's your fifth defender that I've missed there? Is it Nico Williams or someone cheap?
Yeah, I've kept Nico Williams in. Going forward, I don't necessarily see myself using him. I think particularly the fact in that, was it Bournemouth when they played and they conceded goals, you would expect of any game that would be his best shot at a clean sheet and didn't get it. So really he's just in there as a value pick. It will be Trippier, Cancelo and James. I'll just play every week. Emerson just covering for the first week whilst James is out, and then going back to those three going forward. So it makes, to my mind, it makes no difference who those are. You may as well just pick a value 4 million defender, and getting them for both those two slots, the fourth and fifth defenders. If you're not going to be planning on using them very regularly, it makes perfect sense. Particularly if we want to try and put all those funds, it feels like the move is going much more into the midfield and particularly the striker area. So mine would be Nico Williams as a fifth.
Is there any other names you're considering that might potentially change in there? Have you got a plan to get back to Trent if needed?
Well, that would probably depend on. I don't think I'm settled on keeping De Bruyne for a whole season, so it'd probably come from there. I think because we've talked a lot about the kind of lack of value from Salah. I'm hesitant to say that De Bruyne is not good value because of the kind of player he is. But the fact that we're going to basically be captaining Haaland all the time, I can't see a situation I would ever captain De Bruyne over Haaland unless Haaland were a major doubt. So basically I'm in a situation where I'm going to be keeping De Bruyne but not captaining him, which kind of loses the value of that player. But from the other kind of angle, you've got to use the money somewhere, especially if you're not going Salah. So, I would probably see it coming from there. I would maybe downgrade De Bruyne. I'm also eyeing up Zaha in a few weeks' time after he plays Chelsea, and then Crystal Palace have a pretty good run, at which point I could downgrade maybe an 8 million midfielder and move it to Zaha. That gets me an extra million. I think there are plenty of ways in the kind of setups we've talked about to be able to push back to Trent if needed. But I think certainly looking at the fixtures, at least, I don't feel like, and this could all change if he goes and scores a goal and gets a clean sheet against Brighton or whatever, but the fixtures don't appeal to me enough to consider going for him. I think he'll get the odd attack in return, but they just don't look like keeping clean sheets at the moment. So it just feels like he's not delivering for the level he is. So I think until the fixtures really start to turn and for a longer period, I'm happy enough just staying away from him. I think you get good enough value if you compare the value between him and Trippier, for example, and particularly with the fixtures that Newcastle have got compared to Liverpool. I'm happy just avoiding Trent for now.
Fair point. Is there anyone else in defence, Pete, that you'd be considering on a wildcard that you think Charlie's missed, or did he cover it quite well?
He's covered it well. I would say just one more for like a cheaper option outside of Nico Williams and Emerson would be Fofana for Chelsea, and just having him as a rotational player when they have an easier fixture in case you are doubling up with the Chelsea. But Marsh covered it quite well. But I probably prefer Fofana to Williams as it stands currently. But I think Marsh covered it.
It's all about the few extra 0.4 million, is it? I think between them, or 0.3 million. So depends how you can fit it in your budget, doesn't it? Really, like we said, it feels like you're struggling to spend the money, so it might be an upgrade you can make from 0.4. So seeing as though he's covered it so well, we better get you to cover some of the midfield then, haven't we? So if he was on the wildcard, is there some? I feel like the 8 million midfielders is quite an interesting place to talk about. You might want to talk about other areas as well. But is there a standout few midfielders you'd want set in a wildcard if you're a wildcard in LP?
So I think the main two that I have now currently, and I think even after a wildcard, I'll most likely still have is Andreas Pereira for the cheaper option in my midfield. Just because he's consistently playing, he's on set pieces, and he's got a couple of returns this season, I'm pretty sure. So it's just like the mainly bench option. I like him still. And also I am tempted to just stick by Martinelli through the rough fixtures for Arsenal, because he looks like one of their best players every time. He looks like one of their biggest threats every game. He could easily have had the goal against Man U with VAR, and I think he will get at least one return out of the 9 to 12 fixtures at least. And at his price, I think he's 6.3 now. It makes sense to keep him in as the Arsenal player if you were going to have an Arsenal player during this fixture run. But outside of that, I feel like with the 8 million-ish midfielders, I've had Kulusevski so far this year, but I would much prefer to have Luis Diaz, I think, out of the £8 million midfielder options. I feel like he is just the best option. He looks like Liverpool's best player at the moment. It'll be interesting to see him as well, because I know Marsh talked about earlier the Salah and Nunes thing. I feel like that also carries over with Diaz on the other side. He looks a lot better when Nunes doesn't play, I would say. And yeah, for a fourth midfielder, I'm not too sure. For a fifth midfielder, I'm not too sure currently. At the moment, for me, I've had Aronson from Leeds for a few weeks because of their fixture run, and I mean, their fixture run does begin to get worse after game week 9. So I'd probably consider it, but it would just depend on how much money I have at that point. I do like Zaha as an option. He's been amazing so far this season for Palace, by far their best player and attacking threat. It'll be interesting to see now that the transfer window's over. Maybe he was performing to try and get that move, whether he can keep up with this consistent goal scoring form that he's on. But I feel like Zaha, for around cheaper than 8 mil, but he's like 7.2 or something. I feel like he is a good option in a midfield if you were going to wildcard at this current point.
Your fifth midfielder is, of course, the fan favourite Leon Bailey. You're clearly missing him out there.
I just can't trust Gerrard. Once Gerrard's gone, Bailey will come back in, no doubt.
I'm after relying him for some minutes this week, so that's where I'm stuck with. It's interesting you say about the Diaz on the 8 million midfielder, because I think when Charlie was talking to Sam earlier, that you mentioned about keeping Diaz and leaving him on the bench, and I never even thought of that really, because I think there's some other options. I don't know what you think, Pete, in terms of like a Maddison or a Bowen going forward on your wildcard. They've both got decent runs. I know Leicester have got Spurs this week, but after that it's quite decent, and they're kind of these two players that we know can do well, but they've not really shown it this season. Would you be inclined to considering either of those two in your midfield?
I feel like for Maddison, for both of them really. Bowen, I know that he came on in the Europa League game last Thursday and he scored a pen, but apparently he had a good impact off the bench, so maybe we'll start to see a bit of his form from last season start to come back through in his next few weeks. With the Maddison, I just can't get behind the Maddison just because of how bad Leicester are as a team, and I know he's their best player in that, and he's already got a couple of returns this season, but for the 8.8 million that he is, or 7.9 now, I just can't get behind having a 7.9 million player asset from Leicester with how they are at the moment. Maybe things change if Rodgers leaves, they get a new manager in, and yeah, but currently I still think it's Diaz for me in the 8 million bracket. But I would prefer Bowen to Maddison, I would say.
At least Maddison's a better option than Danny Ward. That's all we can say there.
Anyone's a better option than Danny Ward.
Even Iverson on the bench, just because he didn't get a negative point. So we flip back to you, Charlie. I think that kind of mid-price midfielder has been a hot topic that we've been talking about. What are your thoughts around that kind of price range and midfield in general?
I agree with everything Pete just said. Basically, I don't think there's really a standout, which is why there's so much debate about it. I think for the reasons we've just said, both Maddison and Bowen have not really got the only thing actually going for them is their kind of past history and the fixtures. There's nothing necessarily yet to suggest that they should get better. So really, you're just playing a game of hoping they come into form because of the fixtures, which does work quite often. But I don't think there's any real logic of or necessarily anything you can particularly use to go one over the other. Really, it's just you kind of got to take a stab at. I know you mentioned offline, Will, about obviously Europa for West Ham, so maybe that plays into it, and Maddison is a more kind of guaranteed starter. Maybe Bowen has to play some Europa games and get some minutes managed and stuff in the league. I think at the moment, I'm certainly the underlying data seems to back up Zaha as a pick in terms of his value as well, because like Pete mentioned, he's $1 million cheaper than most of those options. The issue with that obviously is him not having a fixture this week and then playing Chelsea, which we've seen Chelsea concede as well, so he's not the worst option against Chelsea, but really it's the following game week that you then want to go in for him. So I think I can see myself not going for him immediately, but getting him in after that Chelsea game. And then, like I say, outside of that, it's kind of just a bit of a gamble, really. You just gotta have to go for the pick you want and stick by them. I think hopping on and off will probably only lead to just missing any good returns. So I think you just have to try and find some reasoning behind one of the picks, probably between the likes of Maddison and Bowen, and stick with them. In some drafts, and the latest one I've got for my potential Game Week 8 wildcard, I have had Foden in, and I think obviously this hinges on whether you start De Bruyne, right? Because you're going to Cancelo and Haaland are a lock, so it's either De Bruyne or Foden. I can't have them both. If I weren't going to go De Bruyne, I would almost definitely have Foden in, I think, regardless of the fixtures. It just feels like out of the rest of the attacking options, and obviously De Bruyne, he's one of the most guaranteed to get minutes at least and start the majority of games. Everyone in that team's prone to getting a benching. We've seen it for De Bruyne. I'm sure we'll see it at some point for Haaland as well. But Pep absolutely loves Foden, and he'll just get the minutes regardless, I think, of anything else. I think if you can just pick an attacking player in that team that's going to get lots of minutes, then you'll get returns for it. So I think he's still a great option at that 8 million bracket. It's just probably the issue of you're going to end up with too many players from Man City, so you can only pick 3. And yeah, I'm not thrilled about the idea of Diaz. I think he's okay, but like Pete mentioned, and we've talked about a few times now, the Nunes factor and how he gets pushed out wider. So I think, the long story coming to an end is that I think Zaha is probably the best option out of those, and you can't really go for him yet. So I'm not sure where that leads us really.
And in circles, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I think you've all covered it very well then. So we kind of talked on wildcard. If we come back to you, Pete, if someone was going to say this week that they were going to free hit, what would you say to them?
If they're going to free hit?
Yeah.
I just would say don't free hit. I don't think it's the right time to free hit. I don't think there's enough good fixtures that's worth a free hit in order to triple up on people. We've talked about how if you're going to go defence, it's only really Newcastle and City that would be anywhere close to a guarantee in terms of a clean sheet, and there's still none of them a guarantee, of course. But with a free hit, when teams like Man U, Liverpool, Chelsea, who you'll have at least one asset in usually, and they're all not playing, I wouldn't do it personally.
How about if you've used your wild card and you've got 6 playing players, for example?
All right, yeah. Then it's a free hit. I think you're in a bad spot though if you're having to free hit this week personally.
But I guess it's kind of weighing up if you just want to play with like 8 players and just take the fact that you've not got 11 players, and then just thinking about the value that free hit would give you later in the season, especially when you've got all these rearrangements. It's one of those ones, I think, kind of, as we touched on, I think earlier when I asked one of you a question, it's probably the quality of those players you've got playing. If you was in that situation, you could get 8 or 9 playing players and the half decent options, like you've got Spurs or kind of Man City coverage, Newcastle coverage, then you might be as well to just save that free hit, because I think it'd be more useful further down the line. What would your thoughts be on that, Charlie? Have you got the same questions?
I think I would agree with what you said. I think I'd probably even rather maybe up to a -8 than use the free hit because of how valuable it's going to be later in the season. I think for anyone that has both the wildcard and the free hit, it's a no-brainer to go with the wildcard. the key part of that is that the wildcard has to be used before the World Cup, whereas the free hit will last us the season. So it's either wildcard or take hits. I think you'd have to probably be in a bracket, and I don't know of anyone that might be in this bracket of maybe only having 4 or 5 players. I think at this point, I think if you can get to 7 or 8, even with a few hits, I would rather do that than use the free hit.
Yeah, that'll be like the season, especially now we've had some postponed games. It's going to be even more chaos, and that's what we love to see. So moving on to more on the fixtures for this coming week. Back to you, Pete. Who are you eyeing up for captaincy?
Well, Haaland's playing this week, so Haaland.
Yeah, he's got a game, so why not?
I don't think it gets more complex than that at the moment. It just has to be Haaland. If you want to take a risk, you can take a risk, but it will most likely backfire at this point. It's just Haaland.
I feel like it's going back to that last season where it's like literally just Salah and every week and Jadid were asking the question at one stage. Would you agree with that, Charlie?
Yeah, I can't see any. Obviously, the only thing we can say is dependent on tomorrow, and Man City's playing Dortmund. So, if there's any indication there, maybe that's the only possible thing that could sway you away from Haaland. So, if for whatever reason you weren't going to go Haaland, then you could probably look at one of the Spurs assets against Leicester, probably a Kane, for example. But yeah, even another Man City asset, I'd take over most of those fixtures. So dependent on what happens tomorrow, it's got to be Haaland, really.
Yeah, I think you could have argued maybe Spurs could be an option, but from what we've seen from them obviously in the game tonight, and they've not really been free flowing. I think they've had 1 or 2 good games where they've scored. I think the first game of the season they scored 4, and I can't remember a lot of times where they've scored a lot of goals, but then they are playing Leicester, so you never know. I feel like that. And I don't think we'd be going as far to a Newcastle, but I think there is options you could go for. But I think at the minute it's just how highly captained Haaland will be. It's not worth the risk, is it really? Unless he picks up imagine he picks up an injury in midweek, and then I think there might be a lot more like wildcards played if that happened.
If that happened, I can imagine Kane's ownership would go up to about 50%. I think Kane is kind of being overlooked to a degree because of how well Haaland's done, and also the other value options in the forward line. There's just no reason really to be going Kane at the moment. But and I think we talked about it last time on the podcast. Maybe he was one of the quiz questions or something in terms of his returns. I think he's only blanked in 1 week out of 6. He's got some kind of return in the rest of the weeks. So he's actually been really consistent, despite, like you say, they've not been scoring, completely free flowing or been getting lots of goals. Ironically, it was the one game that they scored lots of goals. He didn't get anything in, but he's actually been really consistent in getting lots of returns. So it's not the worst option in the world, but it's just the value everywhere else, and the fact there's Haaland around. There's no real reason to go for Kane. Annoyingly, it's one of those very rare seasons where you'd actually wish for 4 striker slots.
Like complete opposite to last year, isn't it? Like where no one wanted a striker at all, and then it's just where you wish you could be more flexible with the formation, really. But it's funny how it changes season on season, isn't it? Where the value sits. But is there anything else we wanted to mention on the fixture? Anything? I feel like we've probably covered it quite well because we've been talking about going forward on the wildcards and even being in Pete's position, going for kind of I wouldn't say free hit there, kind of players just for 1 game week. So I feel like we've touched on the fixtures quite well. So is there anything either of you wanted to add on the fixtures coming up?
No, good for me, I think.
I'll just put in one for the future that I think's been overlooked quite a lot. Going on from game week 9 onwards, have a look out for Havertz as a striker option. I think he's going to pop off.
Big shout.
If only he was still a midfielder, then we might be a bit more tempted. You've got too many striking options already.
He'll outscore them all.
Do you think he'll be better? Obviously, they're not the same price, but compared to Sterling, who do you think will do better?
I would go Havertz over Sterling.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting because obviously Sterling gets an extra point, doesn't he, for the goal? as well. So
Yeah.
And the comparative options as well, I guess. I feel like you've got more forward options than you have midfield at this point, but Sterling is, probably 2.5 million more, roughly?
I think so,
yeah. But you never know, could after the World Cup it might change again, that we don't want strikers or we want to go for Havertz, so it can always change.
The real question is, does anyone dare go back to Havertz after that game week last season?
Don't know what you mean.
Yeah.
Could never be me captain him in that week. Just never captain a Chelsea player, that's the new rule, really. Well, yeah, it's never captain Havertz and never captain Dennis in a week, isn't it, really? That's the kind of like FPL rules you've got to live by for the rest of your life. I think I can't believe that doing that Dennis week was just ridiculous. Having to getting to laugh at people because I had Josh King who got 2 points and Dennis got like -1. I'm like, that's not the kind of captain win I want to be celebrating. It was a funny one, but yeah, I think we probably touched on everything we want to. Then I know it's been a bit of a muddled one because of not having anything to talk about from the previous week because of the postponements, but still done a good hour 20 talking about them, and hopefully that helps everyone going forward on wildcards and etc. But you never know, something might change. Imagine if Haaland gets into tomorrow, that would just cause everyone just like collapse in panic. They've had enough panic for 1 week, they don't want to go over the edge. But yeah, so anything else either of you wanted to mention before we finish?
No, let's wrap it up there.
Yeah, good stuff. So thank you both, as ever, on the nice rotation that we've had with Pete. Thank you for joining us again. I'm sure you'll be back in the rotation at some point. And to keep beating Charlie in the quiz. But yeah,
of course.
I appreciate you both, and I appreciate everyone for listening and whoever's watching the live stream as well. And we shall we've got, we're going to say it's international break, isn't it? So we will most likely be back at some point in an international break, hopefully with some fixtures to actually talk about. And you never know, some of us might be on wildcard again when it comes to that point. So we shall see you sometime in the next week or two, depending on how it falls international break. But apart from that, have a great rest of your evening and see you on the next one.